Yeah. Um, Hello, all. Welcome to this clinical microbiology module as a part of Cycle 2 basic module of AMS. I today, I introduce the eminent speaker, Dr. Aruna Pujari ma'am. She's from Bridge Candy Hospital, Mumbai, and she had a great expertise in this infection control and AMSP implementation throughout this last decade in her hospital. So, without any delay, I would like to hand over the session to Dr. Aruna Pujari, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am. Now
Thank
the
you so
platform
much,
is yours.
Satya, for that kind introduction. I'm sharing my slide.
Yeah, please.
Is it on full screen mode?
Yeah, exactly, ma'am.
Okay, fine. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me this opportunity yet again to talk on a very simple and a very basic topic of microbiology. And I think if our basics are right, a lot of things, go the right way to actually help and support our patients. So this session is on microbiology sampling and processing for various type of specimens. So the overview of my talk is basically I'm going to talk a little about the diagnostic cycle. What is the uniqueness of microbiology samples? A bit on different aspects of the diagnostic cycle, and the common methods that we use, the equipments that we use, the techniques that we use in the microbiology lab to ensure that we are able to give the clinician a correct result. So microbiology really is a science of understanding microorganisms, and clinical microbiology basically uses microbiology information for better patient management. And it's to do with infectious diseases, also to do with immunology, because we also deal with immunological disorders. And it has many arms to it. So I've restricted myself to really infectious diseases here. But as I said, immunology is also an important part of microbiology itself. So under microbiology, we have microbacteriology, mycobacteriology, which is to do with the TB related organisms. Mycology is naturally fungus, parasitology is parasites, and virology is basically to do with viruses. And unlike other branches of laboratory medicine, microbiology has a varied variety of specimens coming to the lab, and it's similar to histopathology. Unlike hematology or biochemistry, where 95% of their samples is basically either is to do with blood. We get a whole lot of different samples like pus, tissue, bone and joint, then CSF, a lot of sterile body fluids, etc., etc. So moving even before the microbiology laboratory, if a patient comes to either a clinic or a hospital with some symptoms, naturally the doctor takes history and performs physical examination. And based on this, the clinician has some differential diagnosis in his or her mind, and on which he or she will order certain tests. So this ordering of tests is based on the pretest probability of the differentials or the diseases that he or she is really thinking about. How does this help is because when the results come in, these results in correlation with the history, the physical examination, and the differential diagnosis will help the clinician to actually rule in or rule out a disease. Also order additional tests if it is required to confirm or refute the diagnosis that further gets identified. This pretest probability, while we always think it is basically the clinician's domain, uh, please remember that even to a microbiologist, it is important, because we have different types of syndromes where different pathogens get involved, and the disease manifestations are very similar. Based on this pretest probability, interpretation of results becomes easy, particularly when the results are conflicting. And for that, I would like to give you an example. I remember a case of meningitis, encephalitis that had come to us in the ICU. This patient actually had an autoimmune disease, and She was immunocompromised from the fact that not only because of the disease was active, that autoimmune disease was active, but she also was on heavy immunosuppressants. And suddenly, after being in the hospital for about 3 or 4 days, she became drowsy. And as a result of which, we suspected encephalitis. A CSF sample was sent. And this sample was, apart from the routine examination of cell counts, they also asked for a meningitis PCR panel. And what we had was human herpes virus 6 coming over there. Now, if I were to consider HHV6 as an important pathogen in causing encephalitis, uh, from literature, what we come to know is that this is only an important pathogen in patients who are immunocompromised. If I were to get this pathogen in a normal, case of an immunocompetent individual from the CSF, which can happen, I would consider it to be a non-pathogen. But in this case, where my patient was immunocompromised, we considered this HHV6 to be actually a pathogen, and we treated and she got better. So it can so happen that you might actually pick up silent organisms, and that history taking the understanding of what are the differential pathogens that we need to take into consideration, and which pathogens can be important. All come from understanding what the pretest probability of the disease really is. Now, in the lab, there are 3 phases to the diagnostic cycle. So there is a pre-analytic phase where basically this is something that the laboratory is involved with before collection of the sample. Then there is the analytic phase where we actually test the sample. And then there is a post-analytic phase where we give the result out. So we'll go through each of these in the next few slides. So as I mentioned, pre-analytic phase starts from test order to sample collection, transportation, and then ensuring that patient ID is correct and the correct test has been asked for. And this is a very, very important phase from the laboratory perspective, because 70% of our errors actually happen in this phase. So maybe the wrong test has been ordered, or the wrong patient ID is there, inappropriate specimen has been collected. So a lot of things can go wrong in this phase, and therefore this phase is very, very important to ensure correct results. So some good practices in the pre-analytic phase could be ordering based upon sample acceptance criteria. An example that I could give you is when we test for Clostridium difficile, there are certain sample acceptance criteria. That is, we will not accept formed stool or solid stool. So if a patient had diarrhea, let's say a day ago, and today the doctor has seen and said, okay, we had diarrhea, let's ask for a C. diff. But today, if the stool sample is formed stool or solid stool, then the lab should actually reject such a stool, because the kind of results that come in later on might be very dicey to actually interpret. Then most samples in microbiology would be taken before antimicrobial agents being administered. Uh, Before initiation of sample collection, it's very important to get all the supplies. So depending upon what kind of sample collection is being done, whether it is a skin scrape, whether it is a pus aspirate, whether it is a tissue sample, whether it is a fluid examination, it is important to ensure that all your supplies are there. The appropriate sample is collected. For example, if there was a drain which is there for around 7 or 8 days, this drain we know can be colonized by a whole lot of organisms. So this is not an appropriate sample. Instead, if there is a collection in the abdomen, then that collection should get aspirated under ultrasound guidance, which will be a much better sample than a drain sample. Then ensuring sterility is maintained when collecting any sample. The moment you compromise on sterility, remember the results can go wrong, and the results are definitely then skewed from the patient's perspective also. And finally, after collection of the sample, it needs to get transported to the laboratory as early as possible at the appropriate temperature, and using containers or transport media as required based upon what organisms we are really suspecting to be present. So, as I mentioned, this particular pre-analytic phase is very, very important. Here again, apart from these good practices, at every stage in the diagnostic cycle, it is very important to ensure patient identification. And just like the global patient safety goals, PSG1 actually is patient identification. And trust me, there's a reason why even WHO has kept a patient identification as the number one goal. This is something that needs to be done at every step, both in the clinical area as well as in the laboratory. One should ensure that patient identification has been confirmed at every step, because it can go wrong absolutely anywhere. So some ways in which we overcome our challenges in the pre-analytic phase would be ordering tests through the HMIS, or the hospital information system. You could have in the hospital information system, which is linked to the laboratory information system, certain sample acceptance criteria. And the ward, before ordering the test, will need to fill in certain sample acceptance criteria. And if that is not there, then the test order will not happen. So using an automated ordering system, it becomes so much more easy, and it helps to avoid errors, particularly when it comes to patient identification. So using barcode labels in the laboratory, whenever we collect a sample, we actually use a dedicated barcode label which has a specific LIS number, which is for that particular test only, coming from a particular patient. Then the analytic phase. In the analytic phase, the sample has now come into the laboratory. We have identified what tests we have to do. Here in the microbiology laboratory, what happens is basically we decide on what are the different methodologies we are going to work on using this particular sample. So in the microbiology lab, we use microscopy, we use enzyme immunoassays, we use cultures, we use molecular methods as a broad classification of the tests that we perform over here. Now, if you look at each of these, some of these would be diagnostic, some of these would be prognostic in nature, some of them are confirmatory diagnosis, and some of them provide supportive diagnosis in the management of infectious diseases. And again here, as I mentioned earlier, pre-test probability of the disease becomes very, very important, because if I have a differential diagnosis in my mind based upon the clinical features of the patient, then I can actually add on certain specific tests or media depending upon what pathogens I'm really thinking about. Because there will be pathogens which I'm not able to grow, which are called as atypical or fastidious organisms. There will be pathogens, which can be identified using a molecular method versus a culture. There will be pathogens which are better identified on microscopy, giving you spot diagnosis. There will be pathogens which are better identified through an antigen antibody reaction. So knowing what the bug could be, or what the differentials for the organisms could be, helps in actually selecting the test even at the level of the microbiology laboratory. So the burden is not only on the clinician to identify and order the tests. The microbiology laboratory plays an equal and an important role in suggesting tests and recommending tests based upon the clinical history and the physical findings, and also based upon the set of results that actually come in. An example that I could give here that I can remember is, suppose that a blood culture has been asked for, and we've done a blood culture. At around 16 hours, this blood culture flags positive with gram-negative bacilli, which we see on smear, and this patient is in the ICU. So what can be done is, if I have the means and I have a multiplex PCR panel, I'm likely going to call up the ICU and inform my colleagues there that, look, we've grown a gram-negative bacillus, and if the patient is not doing well, maybe we should go ahead doing the blood culture ID using the multiplex panel, so that we will be able to identify the organism within a matter of 1.5 hours. Versus if you were to use the standard conventional method for following up your blood cultures, that is going to take at least another day. So many a times, naturally, the ICU physicians want the identification, because this identification itself would help in tailor making therapy from empiric to targeted. So that's one example where, microbiologists can actually get involved actively in recommending tests. Another very common example that I could give is if I have a urine routine specimen that has come to me with a patient who's having fever and burning micturition. On microscopy, I see around 50 to 60 pus cells, leukocyte esterase positive, nitrite positive. I automatically put in remarks to say that, a urine culture should be done, either from the same sample, or, if the patient can give us another sample. So such kind of suggestions or advisory services is something which very much happens from the microbiology laboratory. And it's not only the clinicians who can actually request or order for the test. So what are the different techniques? So next few slides, I'm going to show the different techniques that we use commonly in the microbiology lab. So we start off with microscopy. In fact, microscopy is one of the very rapid methods of identifying organisms. And microscopy itself can be divided into cover slip mounts, or wet mounts, or stained mounts. So we do cover slip mounts for a whole lot of specimens. Actually, we do it for the BAL to look out for motile parasites, particularly larval forms of Strongyloides stercoralis. We do stool examination as a routine, where we use iodine mount as well as the saline mount to look for ova and parasites. We also do urine routine examination. We do hanging drop preparation for stool to look out for Vibrio cholerae. Then 10% potassium hydroxide mounts can be done on a variety of specimens like tissue, where basically fungal colonies, fungi like this, septate or aseptate fungi like this can be seen. There's also calcofluor mount, which is now available to most labs. Again, a wet mount technique, which is a fluorescent stain. And the chitin in these fungi basically fluoresce on this calcofluor white, and they are very easily picked up on microscopy, much more easily as compared to the KOH mount. And this is how it would look, it fluoresces. This is a typical diabetic ketoacidosis with mucormycosis that is seen in a young child who has type 1 diabetes and presents with left-sided facial and orbital swelling. This is something which is very, very classic. And the tissue from here we had received from the OT, and that debrided tissue showed this calcofluor white, which was positive. This is a spot diagnosis. Probably takes, once a sample is received in the laboratory, it probably takes around 10 minutes to give this kind of diagnosis. And it's very, very useful because this can be done easily when the patient is still on the table, and indicating that extensive debridement is still needed. Then moving on to microscopy, which is using stained specimen. So in stained mounts, we have gram stain, Zn stain for mycobacteria. We have 1% Zn stain for nocardia and opportunistic parasites like Cystoisospora, then Cyclospora and Cryptosporidia. And then we have Giemsa or Leishman stain for a variety of parasites as well as fungi like malaria, filaria, as well as Pneumocystis xyrovesi. So in the gram stain, what do we see? In the gram stain is a very basic stain that we use for all the specimens that come into the microbiology laboratory and undergo cultures. So here we see host cells, for example, presence of epithelial cells. We see inflammatory response to the infection in the form of pus cells. And we see if there are any organisms. So typically in the gram stain, there could be gram positive organisms, there could be gram negative organisms, there could be these organisms may also have a particular arrangement. Like, for example, they may be in pairs, they may be lanceolate pattern, they might be chains, they might be safety pin appearance. So these are some of the typical characteristics of organisms which we note on a gram stain. This is the Ziel-Nielsen stain for mycobacteria, and here basically acid-fast bacilli, these red colored bacilli here are acid-fast bacilli. Now, when you have acid-fast bacilli coming from sputum or from a tissue, you can only say that these are mycobacteria. You need additional tests to say that this is Mycobacterium tuberculosis complex or non-tuberculous mycobacteria. So the Zeal-Nielsen stain can certainly identify mycobacteria. Then this is a 1% Zn acid-fast stain, which can be used for both nocardia. If I were to draw your attention, these red colored thin branching filaments are characteristic of nocardia. And again, this is something which is like a spot diagnosis. You see it in around 10 or 15 minutes and you're done. This is the diagnosis to the patient, and the patient can be started on targeted therapy. Similarly, this is cyclospora that was identified from a stool specimen in an immunocompromised patient. And this is PCP, the typical black colored cysts that are seen in the bowel. They're usually in bunches with a collapsed wall kind of an appearance, which is on the GMS stain. It appears black. If you use other stains like Giemsa, it will appear a little pinkish in color. Then the Giemsa and the Leishmans also look out for malaria and filaria. Typically, vivax or falciparum, the ring forms or the trophozoites can be seen. And then we have some of the fluorescent stains, like we use fluorescent stain for acid-fast bacilli, where it is supposed to be a screening technique, and it has close to 6% additional sensitivity as compared to your acid-fast AFB stain. So these are some of the common microscopic methods that we use in microbiology, which could be unstained wet mount cover slips or stained preparations. Then the next technique that is used in enzyme immunoassays, which can be done on cold blood or serum. These are again another set of rapid diagnostic tests that we have, which are in the form of this kind of chromatography based tests, where you have control bands and then you are waiting for the line to appear or not, suggesting whether the disease is present or not, respectively. These again are used commonly. They are rapid tests used for malaria, visceral leishmaniasis, dengue, hepatitis B, COVID-19 antigens, candida, PCP, biomarkers of fungi like BDJ and galactomannan. So while these are rapid tests, with the EIA, there are also formats which are available as manual enzyme immunoassays or manual ELISAs, which can be there. They are also available on automated platforms like the VIDAS platform. If you were to go into a lab, VIDAS is a very common machine that is used by a whole lot of laboratories to do enzyme immunoassays. So this is called as chromatography. Plus, it can be automated. Plus, it can also be done absolutely manually using the 96 titer well plate. Then there are urinary antigen detection tests, which are also based on EIAs, but these are antigens. And these are also very rapid tests. So this is for Streptococcus pneumoniae, this is for Legionella, this is for Histoplasma capsulatum, and this one here is basically for the lipoarabinomannan LAM assay, which is for Mycobacterium tuberculosis complex. So once again, urinary antigens make it a rapid diagnosis to identify pneumonias because of either strep pneumonia or Legionella. Remember, all of these are actually respiratory pathogens. So they do become important, particularly in patients where the pretest probability is high towards these patients, particularly as seen in immunocompromised individuals. So there is an ease of specimen collection here because it's a urine sample. The results are obtained in 15 to 20 minutes. Most of them are diagnostic. They do not have any role in prognosis. Occasionally, they can be costly, and they are less sensitive as compared to your EIAs or ELISA-based methods. And it would also depend upon, the positivity would also depend upon serotype. So my experience with Legionella using this card for the last 12 years has been, it's not a great test somehow in our settings. Maybe we have a different set of Legionella serotypes that are present here, and not really the one that is quoted onto this particular immunochromatography card. So if it comes positive, um, that's very good. But if it is negative, it really has no role to play. It will not tell it is that the disease is absent. So it is more specific than it is sensitive. Then we also do a whole lot of antibody detection, and this antibody detection is usually through serum samples for bacteria, for viruses, even for some parasites. Antibody detection is a very useful technology, often done for diseases of cell-mediated immunity or intracellular organisms, and those organisms which might be difficult to grow. The antibody detection is basically an indirect response, because with the antibodies, you are actually detecting whether I have responded to the pathogen or not. So it is my host response to a particular pathogen which is causing the disease that I am going to understand or estimate using the antibody detection methods. So they measure the host response. They give results rapidly or in a few hours. Again, here it is diagnostic in nature. The disadvantages are that it is indirect, non-specific, and paired samples would be required. So typically, if you are going to do antibody detection, then a paired sample, which is about 2 to 4 weeks apart, is absolutely essential. It's detected only after the first week of infection, because it is the host immune response. So when a pathogen enters my body is going to take at least a week to try and understand whether or not I have come across this particular pathogen earlier, and to decide a response of how the response would be mounted. So these are not early detection assays, but they will come only after about 5 to 7 days, and they do not have any role in prognosis. Another thing about antibody detection would therefore be that if you're suspecting an acute infection, do not ask for an antibody detection, because it was more likely to come negative. And based on that, you cannot even say that this particular disease is not there. So what we saw in the last few slides were all about rapid tests, and how are these rapid tests really important from the perspective of antimicrobial stewardship, which is basically a collaboration, that we have, clinical pharmacists and microbiologists and the clinicians have or are interested in. So this is a very nice paper, which in fact came in 2022 from Asia Pac region, which said that these rapid tests can be used at the initiation stage, okay, when the patient has just come to the physician, and after examination, the physician has certain differentials in his or her mind and wants to do certain tests which would be rapidly available to further triage this patient. Then it could also be used while the patient is on treatment, let's say after 24 to 48 hours, to see whether there is response to therapy and it's an adequate response to therapy. And finally, some of these rapid tests can actually be used for de-escalation of therapy. And here again, they will have an important role to play. So rapid tests are important in all parts of the patient care pathway, and they are very useful tools in the microbiology laboratory, because they will give you results in probably less than 6 hours. That is what also is a definition of a rapid test. Now, moving on to what, almost microbiology is synonymous with, is basically cultures. When you talk about microbiology, you talk about cultures, and you think that cultures are the only things that we do. Cultures are actually the backbone of microbiology. They're the gold standard method by which, you can confirm the diagnosis of a pathogen being present from a particular site. It also allows us to provide the isolate for antimicrobial susceptibility testing, based on which we could further tailor make the duration of therapy. For example, we know that the IDSA guidance recommends blood cultures being done every 2 to 3 days after a candidemia has been identified. And from the last culture that was positive, you have to continue the duration of therapy for another 2 weeks. So there it becomes very, very important. Also, it will be of prognostic significance. So for example, a culture came positive in the earlier time, and then later on, over a period of time with therapy, the culture became actually negative. It also helps you tracing the source, or which is so very important when it comes to managing infectious diseases, because unless you identify the source and unless you do source control, alone antibiotics will not have much role to play. Also, cultures are mainly site specific in nature, so you might get sterile body fluids, urine, sputum, CSF, blood cultures, bone, tissue, and so on and so forth. And particularly with the sterile body fluids, we are also used to doing, putting these sterile body fluids into blood culture bottles along with direct cultures, because that helps in augmenting the sensitivity of this kind of culture, because the blood culture medium is very enriched and has plenty of nutrients. So in possibacillary specimens, or specimens where lesser number of organisms are there, these blood culture bottles actually help them increase the number of bacteria, and they can be then easily identified. Now, even amongst culture-based methods, normally we think that culture-based methods will give you results only after 48 to 72 hours. But there are now rapid culture-based methods that are also available, which will give you results in less than 24 hours. And this was one study which we had done somewhere in 2015, where, with the use of chromogenic agar medium, we could actually identify MRSAs in less than 24 hours. And when we compared it with our older method where we use blood agar plate or a mannitol salt agar, as you see here, our turnaround time was actually 24 hours for more than 90% of the samples. Whereas using the conventional method, our turnaround time was minimum 72 hours, minimum 48 hours, and a maximum of 120 days. And while we use these chromogenic agar media for MRSA, chromogenic agar media are now available for carbapenem resistant enterobacteriales. They're also available for Candida, like Candida auris, and so on and so forth. So this can be very, very useful, particularly if you are screening patients, or if you are trying to identify an outbreak. These rapid culture-based methods using chromogenic media become essential or useful tools in identifying pathogens early. Okay, so basically what happens with chromogenic media is, as you see here, these have chromogens, these media have chromogens in it, and depending upon the different types of organisms, it will show different types of colors. So visually also you can easily understand what pathogen it could be, and based on that, further investigations can be done. Then moving on to cultures, which are actually the bread and butter of microbiology. So here we have a whole lot of different types of plates. This is blood agar. This is Subrod's Exos agar for fungi. This is chocolate agar for fastidious organisms. And this is McConkey's agar. So normally when a sample comes to us, we would at least plate in these three. Fungal, based upon the suspicion of a fungus in the specimen, we would go about adding Seborrhoeic agar. Then, as I told you previously, for sterile body fluids, we also tend to augment into these blood culture bottles. As you see here, this is the mycotic lytic bottle. This is the anaerobic. This is the aerobic. This is the mycosis ICF. And this is the pediatric bottle. So, typically in all of these three, 8 to 10 cc is required. Here again, 1 to 5 cc is required, and here 1 to 3 ml is required. So normally for sterile body fluids like pleural fluid, ascitic fluid, and so on, we tend to use the pediatric bottles, which are 1 to 3 ml. Now this picture here is a picture of our sonicator. So we know that biofilms are present in on implants. So any kind of implant which needs to be cultured, apart from doing direct cultures, we also do a sonication process where we basically we will throw ultrasound waves onto the implant, and that will help dislodge the biofilm and the microorganism planktons into the fluid, and that fluid is then collected and it can further be cultured both on the solid media or put into into blood culture bottles so that we will be able to get the results very, very quickly. Then another way of doing cultures apart from this is basically to do with aerobic cultures, would be anaerobic cultures, where we use pouches, jars, or we might have an anaerobic workstation. So here, this kind of workstation is a way of processing, as well as it is another way of also incubating the sample. So it's a dual system. And you may not find this in every lab, but fortunately for us, since 2015, we've been working on anaerobe. So this kind of setup is there with us. Then blood cultures are a very important tool, actually speaking, for us to identify sepsis and patients with sepsis, septic shock. There are manual as well as automated methods. What suffices for me to say is basically whether you use BD or you use bioMérieux, it's always better to use automated blood culture systems, because it improves your workflow. It allows data interfacing so that errors are less. It prevents any kind of subcultures, and multiple different types of ready-made media are available, which can actually help in identifying organisms so much better. So this is one study where, when conventional fluids were done by routine methods, and where, they were put into blood culture bottles, as you see here, from the same number of fluids, naturally, your blood culture augmented bottles had almost 5 times more sensitivity or positivity as compared to those that were through conventional methods. So once you have grown the organism on the plate, then the next step is to do the antimicrobial susceptibility testing. And this is the instrument most of us use for doing antimicrobial susceptibility. And it is based on microbroad dilution. This is called as a Vitek. But please remember, there are other methods also of doing antimicrobial susceptibility. For example, the E-test, which is the gradient diffusion method. Then we have the disk diffusion method. So a lot of laboratories in India also use the disk diffusion methods based on the criteria for disk diffusion. Then for tuberculosis, we have solid and liquid media, but trust me, most of us are using this liquid media till now, minimum 6 weeks. It can go up to 8 weeks also, if it is no growth and you have a strong suspicion. This is the midget, which is the gold standard, can be performed on all specimens. And it not only grows Mycobacterium tuberculosis complex, but also can grow non-tuberculous mycobacteria, both slow and fast growing. And why is this important still is because it provides the isolate for drug susceptibility testing, and it also provides the isolate for molecular epidemiology. So your TAT or turnaround time for cultures on the solid media are about 2 to 4 weeks, whereas for on the liquid medium, it is somewhere around 2 to 3 weeks. And on the same medium, you can also do drug susceptibility, which will take an additional about 2 to 3 weeks apart from the liquid cultures. Then the fourth aspect of my talk, that is about molecular methods. This is also one of the very common methods that we use in the laboratory. And this includes your proteomics, that is your MALDI-TOF, and the genomics, which comprises of monoplex and syndromic approach multiplex PCRs. So what happens with the MALDI-TOF is basically that there is protein denaturation that happens of the organism. And then based upon the size of the proteins, the proteins will move on a charged lane, and based on their size and heaviness, they will get segregated. Now, this further is made into plots. And there's a database that has a whole lot of such organisms which have been identified, and their plots are available. The instrument will automatically compare the plot that is available to you through a single colony with the plot that is already there on the database, and it will give you an ID. So as of now, MALDI-TOF is only being used as an identification system, not really a culture antimicrobial susceptibility based system. So it's rapid in the sense that for bacteria, it takes about only 3 to 5 minutes once you have grown. So MALDI-TOF can only be done from samples where the organism has grown onto a culture plate. So even small 4 or 5 hour colonies, very small, tiny, can be actually put through MALDI-TOF and identified very, very quickly. it has a very large database of pathogens. It can be automated to give you high throughputs. It can help identify anything that can grow. So whether it's bacteria, fungi, mycobacteria, nocardia, or actinomyces, anything that grows can be identified. The database can also be expanded by users. There are multiple consumables, there are minimal consumables when it comes to Malditoff, and in fact, it is cost effective. There's a lot of literature on this. So not all technology advancements really are pocket draining. The disadvantage, as of now, it only gives you identification. There is no antimicrobial susceptibility, and more testing needs to be done using colonies. Identification is limited by the database, but trust me, the database is huge to be able to identify the variety that we face. Closely related species might be misidentified, and this is an important issue. For example, E. coli and Shigella often get misidentified, but by the looks of it, you can easily know that whether this is E. coli or Shigella. So please, the basics of microbiology, if they are strong and they are fine, then the instruments don't tend to fail you. Misidentifications could happen if we don't pick up the pure colonies, and if the target plate is dirty. Then extraction is required for some organisms like Mycobacterium, Nocardia, etc., because they have a very thick cell wall, and tiny mucoid colonies may not be identified. So here, because of the mucoidness, what happens is that capsule actually does not allow the proteins to disintegrate, as a result of which the organism will go unidentified. And in such situations, it's always better to fall back upon culture, gram stain, etc., to identify what really the organism is. The next molecular method is the GeneXpert. I'm sure all of you all have heard about the GeneXpert. It's a real-time PCR which gives you results in less than 3 hours. Very, very easy to use. It has, in India at least, it is available as a decentralized platform at many public centers, and all different types of specimens can be processed on the Malditoff, on the GeneXpert, which is a platform for not only tuberculosis, but these days being used for many other diseases like Clostridium difficile, flu PCRs, GeneXpert 4-plex, HIV and HCV viral load, and so on. And while GeneXpert has really made life a lot easy, particularly when it comes to tuberculosis, this is not a point of care assay because it requires a UPS-based system, and it does not eliminate the need for a drug susceptibility. So please remember that with any of the molecular methods, drug susceptibility needs to be done separately, and we should not only rely on the molecular methods. There's another very different approach that came in around 2016, 2017 in India, which is to do with syndromic approach PCRs. Initially, there were just 1 or 2, but now we have close to 6 panels that are available to us with a whole lot of targets, 20 plus targets. And these targets not only targeting bacteria, viruses, but also atypical bacteria. They also target the antimicrobial resistant genes, and they target parasites. And this makes life a lot easy because you can actually identify different types of pathogens which might actually present as either upper respiratory symptoms or lower respiratory symptoms or bone and joint infection and so on. And what's the beauty is that all of these results might actually be available to you from 1.5 hours once the sample has been received in the laboratory. And they have far better sensitivity as compared to cultures because these are tuned to be much more sensitive. So please remember, anything that is very, very sensitive can also have a false positive. So understanding the different pathogens that are present in the syndrome, understanding the patient's clinical features and the current situation help you in interpreting these results so much better. So this is just one example of the bone and joint panel. As you see here, there's a whole lot of gram positive, gram negative, the drugs and the yeast, all of these are present. Unfortunately, in this sample, at least there is no target that is detected here, and everything is negative. But if you see in the bone and joint panel, you have Anaerococcus, you have Cutibacterium, you have Parvimonas, Feingoldea, Peptonephilus. All of these are actually anaerobes, which are not very easily grown in the laboratory. So these tools serve as important interventions in allowing early diagnosis as well as initiating targeted therapy. Then there are some assays that are not yet available here in India, but they appear to be very useful and good, particularly in diagnosis of sepsis. So this is the T2 biosystem, which has two panels, one for Candida, one for bacteria. And in fact, here directly from the vacutainer, you could actually pick up and do the molecular test based on this MRI. And in 3 to 5 hours, one would get the results. So you directly take whole blood. You bypass the cycle for blood culture. So directly take the whole blood and push it into this system. And in about 3 to 5 hours, you would get the identification of the organisms. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, there are two cards, and the bacterial card only has the escape pathogens, and the candidal card has only albicans, tropicalis, parapsilosis, krusei, and glabrata. What I would want from here would be naturally drug resistant genes also, because that would help me identify or target my therapy better. And certainly amongst the candida, I would really want to see Candida auris. So if that is not there, probably this is not really very useful to us. The next future modality that we are going to be talking about is next generation sequencing, which has definitely a lot of advantages over these conventional PCRs, because it's an open platform that allows you to identify bacteria, fungi, and viral in a single pathogen assay. It could be quantitative based on sequence reads, and it is an unbiased and untargeted method, which has the potential of delivering very high sensitivity and specificity data. We've had some experience on the NGS. So basically, that the NGS has come to a clinical laboratory by itself is a huge leap, because NGS is a very demanding technology, and till now it was mainly in the research lab. So COVID really brought NGS out into the clinical microbiology laboratory, and this is probably the technology of tomorrow, and this is probably what is going to sustain, remain, and it is going through still a lot of changes, particularly when it comes to turnaround time. So from probably months, it came to weeks, and now has come to days. But we are awaiting when it will be probably less than a day, the results to take. So this was our experience on an NGS platform, where this patient came to us with recurrent high-grade fever for about 4 months, which would go away with simply starting ceftriaxone or meropenem. She had one initial episode of loose motions, after which she did not have any loose motions. And immediately you stop therapy and she would land up with an episode of fever once again. She was immunocompromised actually, due to drugs and disease both. And almost on 4 occasions, her blood cultures came positive. So while on the first occasion when it came positive, we could see these, seagull appearing, or, snake-like organisms, gram-negative bacilli that were there. And we knew what this was. And so all of us thought this was Campylobacter. And she had loose motions, and we were very happy. In fact, Malditov gave the result of Campylobacter coli, and we also gave a drug susceptibility to the clinician, and we were all happy. Then she comes again with blood cultures positive every month for the next 3 months, and despite we continuing to see the organism on microscopy, we were not able to grow. And it is at that point in time when we sent blood cultures for next generation sequencing, and we actually identified that this was Helicobacter cinnaei, not really Campylobacter coli. And with that, we actually were able to, give the correct organism identification to the clinician. Because Helicobacter cinnaei is a very special pathogen, and in patients with repeated blood cultures, it is said that it requires multi-drug therapy, and it requires therapy for close to 6 to 8 weeks. So that is what happened, and subsequently the patient has not really come back to us. But that's how important NGS has become, and that's how important identifying a particular pathogen is also seen the utility of this particular platform. So that was all about the analytic phase in the lab. We now move on to the post-analytic phase where results are already there. Many a times in microbiology, we are still doing manual results, that is typing of results. And we all know that whenever you start typing results or doing things manually, there is a greater chance of error. So interfacing of results is also now available, particularly machine-to-machine interface, or using a what is that called? It's a kind of software that allows you to collect data from a whole lot of equipments, and then it will put in data or organize the data in a manner that your patient identification errors are reduced. Then in the post-analytic phase, once results are ready, particularly from the antimicrobial stewardship point of view, we would want to give you results of antimicrobial agents that actually concentrate at the site of infection. So cascading of the culture results is one way of doing that, where we will suppress all the higher antibiotics if lower antibiotics are susceptible, or we would suppress the glycopeptides for an MSSA and so on. Then a whole lot of comments, advisory remarks, etc., also come in the post-analytic phase. For example, if I were to get in a meningitis PCR CMV and the patient is not really immunocompromised, I would actually mention there that on the report as remarks that this is a silent organism, and this is not really a pathogen to be considered in this particular case. Or with blood cultures, either you tend to report contaminants and make a comment saying that these are contaminants, or else you could actually report them as no growth if you're fairly sure that this is a contaminant. Then with urine samples, a lot of times you have polymicrobial flora. So here again, the comments of polymicrobial flora and to repeat the urine culture may be given. And all of these results, particularly the ones that are significant, it is very, very important that we actually communicate these results. So overall, what's most important in this situation, and particularly with a lot of microbiology results not coming on the same day, unlike hematology or biochemistry, communicating results to the clinical team at different steps, be it microscopy based communication, maybe culture based communication, just to indicate that, okay, we have grown gram negative or we have grown gram positive, and this looks like E. coli, this looks like staph, and so on, are also important. So routine communication on a daily basis becomes a very important aspect of the post-analytic phase in the microbiology laboratory. So finally, my key takeaways are that the practice of clinical microbiology requires understanding of the various infection syndromes and their etiology, because unless you know that, if your mind does not know, your eyes don't see, and you will not perform those kind of special tests, you will not maybe able to give advisory services or recommendations to your clinical team to really hit on to the specific pathogen, and especially so when you are maybe dealing with a more rarer bug causing an infection. Everything that we do in the microbiology laboratory is about diagnostic stewardship, and we know that diagnostic stewardship greatly supports antimicrobial stewardship, especially when the results of a diagnostic test are taken into consideration and a change is made from maybe empiric to targeted and so on and so forth. And a clear understanding of these test methods, principles, their interpretation in various clinical scenarios is very, very important to optimize and bring better patient outcomes. So with that, I would like to thank the association for giving me once again another opportunity to be able to talk about microbiology, which is my field of interest and expertise. Thank you very much.
Yeah, firstly, thank you so much for the wonderful session, ma'am. You made the concepts like easy, like you used the layman language and it would be very easy to understand. So, and also you addressed with the tagging the literature. So that is also one of the like a good part which I observed. Thank you so much once again, ma'am. There are few queries that were noted. So can I go for the
Yes,
questions, ma'am?
yes, yes.
Yeah. Basically, I'll start with the clinical pharmacist or clinical pharmacologist perspective. When we are implementing this diagnostic stewardship, are like antimicrobial stewardship and infection control, these three pillars of the
Yes.
quality. So, what exactly a microbiologist would be having or expecting from a clinical pharmacist
Hmm.
when you are dealing with the reports or AST reports, understanding the concepts of microbiology correlating to the infection etiology that you mentioned. So, what exactly you expect, ma'am, from a CP? May I know,
Okay.
please?
So the CP would be really involved in, the right drug, the dose, the duration, and so on and so forth. So, uh, I think it's very important for us to communicate with each other also, because if I am giving a particular antibiotic susceptibility report and it shows that, let's take an example of an MSSA. Okay. An
Yeah.
MSSA has been reported from, let's say, a carbuncle, and this carbuncle is in a patient who is diabetic. And empirically, the patient has been started on, because we know carbuncles are usually caused by staph. MRSA is always at the back of the mind. Teicoplanin has been started, or maybe
Yeah.
vancomycin has been started. Now there is a report of MSSA. I know that clinical pharmacists almost always will go on rounds on a daily basis and will see all the patients. In these patients where a culture is positive, I think you all also should get a flag that these are the patients whose cultures are positive. And if in this patient that vancomycin is still going on despite the culture coming positive and indicating MSSA, it is a very important change that needs to be made. So
Yeah.
we need to collaborate very, very closely to ensure that people are actually acting to the the suggestions of the antimicrobial susceptibility testing. Many a times you
Yeah.
will find that the drugs are, so there is a carbapenem resistant organism and the patient is getting a carbapenem.
Yeah.
Okay. So many times they would get drugs which don't reach the site of infection.
Okay.
So many times I think we should also get involved in, in doing audits at the emergency level or ICU level where, you have a new infection setting in, and whether or not microbiology investigations have been sent or not sent, which is called as
Okay.
a culture of cultures. You could actually find
Exactly.
out whether they have been sent. Then people are simply changing antibiotics or adding antibiotics without having sent the appropriate cultures. So I think the clinical pharmacy team, pharmacology team should come to the lab and at least go through the lab. I think this is a very good initiative that you all have taken of understanding what all things are there in the lab. The lab can be very, very complex, and
Yes.
it should be part of your curriculum to at least go through the laboratory and see what all things happen, so that y'all can also, so many times I see in discharge reports, sometimes blood cultures are not mentioned.
Oh, okay.
Blood cultures also may not be mentioned. So the whole thing about microbiology cultures is that those results come at 48 hours, 72 hours and beyond that, and just people lose track of it. So I think um, that is one place where we as a team can really work to support AMS.
Yeah. Definitely, ma'am. And the point which you addressed just now, like when we are implementing something in emergency department, this antimicrobial stewardship, followed by you mentioned whether the samples were collected before antibiotic administration or not, whether it is like the sample were collected correctly, transported. So when we are dealing with emergency, which is like 70% of errors which they are occurring. So how to implement this stewardship as per your experience and like how you are implementing in your institute? Could you share your thoughts, ma'am?
So, we were doing at some point in time culture of cultures in the EMS where patients come through the day, and we would
Okay.
go we would actually do audit about a week, meaning of older patients. And
Okay.
we would actually see in how many patients antimicrobial agents were prescribed And
Okay.
based on the infection syndromes that the clinician thought about whether cultures were being sent or not. And
Okay.
it was not surprising that if the patient were OPD, meaning coming to the EMS and then going away home, not very sick or ill, the chances that antibiotics were prescribed but no cultures were sent were close to about 70%. Whereas if the
Oh,
patient was in-house ill and would get either admitted to the ward or to the ICU, the chances that we would have cultures being sent were almost about 90%. So that gave us, a clue that we need to at least communicate with our emergency physicians that see, if you're thinking of diarrhea, not really thinking, if the patient presents with diarrhea and you think of an infection there, maybe a bacteria, and you want to start an antimicrobial agent, at least send for stool routine and stool culture, or you could use some of the newer diagnostics that are available with us. For example, the GI PCR,
okay.
some kind of test to then base on your further action, further course of action. Another example could be respiratory infections. So
Okay.
when it comes to upper respiratory infections, we know that maximum abuse for antibiotics happens in upper respiratory infections, and yet we
Yeah,
also know that 70% of these infections are caused by viruses, not bacteria. So if you
exactly.
do multiplex VCRs at the EMS level, it is very easy to identify, okay, this is a bacteria. You probably don't need an viral antibacterial agent. And most
Ex-
viruses are not to be treated, excepting for a few. So that is something we were actually able to do with our emergency. There's a whole lot of work yet to be done, but that's a little bit that we have worked in our emergency department.
Great, great, great to hear, ma'am. Great. And the next question is like when you are talking about this enzyme immunoassay tests. So there you are talking about urinary antigen detection tests, something. So you are mentioning all the bacterial lists or kits that are available are like the non, I mean the bacteria that is not common to the urinary tract,
Yes.
like Enterobacterial, Enterococcus. So, if it is something this kind of bacteria, are there any rapid tests available,
No,
ma'am?
no. So I'll tell you. Basically, in the enzyme immunoassays, these enzyme immunoassays are available in various formats. Normally, we do enzyme immunoassays. So basically, it's an antigen antibody reaction. Okay.
Yeah.
So we use serum also to detect a whole lot of viruses, bacteria, parasites. The urinary antigen tests are just another format of EIAs which
Yeah.
are available for these four pathogens because their metabolites are excreted in the urine of strep
Okay.
pneumoniae, legionella. These metabolites are excreted in the urine and they can be picked up because urine is a very good sample, very easy to
Exactly.
non-invasive sample that is available. But EIAs are much more used when it comes to things like dengue, chikungunya
Okay.
IgM. So we do
Exactly.
dengue IgM IgG, we do chikungunya IgM, then we do for visceral leishmania, there's an antigen. Then there is so many HIV, HBV, HCV. These antibodies are all enzyme immunoassays, actually speaking. So, they can be done on blood samples, which are serum, which can be mostly serum samples, and
Understood.
the urine antigen test is also one kind of immunoassay actually, because on that strip, no, while you detect the antigen on the strip, there will be an antibody coated to that particular antigen. So it's just a principle that we use, and it's very commonly used in the lab.
Yeah. So you answered the exact question, ma'am. Thank you for addressing this. And one last question, can I ask, please, ma'am?
Yes.
It is like when we are dealing with rapid multiplex PCR panel, only this is the test that is including anaerobic bacteria. to identify or to like know exact the missed bacteria that in cultures. So will it be an alternate? Will it be the option for identifying this anaerobic bacteria, ma'am? Or is there any other alternative for dealing anaerobic diagnostics towards you?
So unfortunately, meaning with anaerobic diagnosis, these multiplex PCRs are useful. And the other way to go about it is only cultures. And for
Okay.
cultures, you need special settings, which is not available with every laboratory.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a very specialized branch of microbiology. And yet, if the lab has that kind of specimens coming in, I think they should invest into anaerobic microbiology, because Bacteroides fragilis, which is the most common, anaerobe that gets isolated, uh, we have seen about 20% resistance to carbapenems.
Oh,
So,
okay.
that's one more place where antimicrobial resistance is creeping up. And, we've had blood cultures flagging positive with simply Bacteroides fragilis, which is carbapenem
Oh,
resistant. Even meropenem,
ex
even metronidazole resistance is close to the tune of 10 to 15%. So
okay.
while multiplex PCRs can be used, I think if you have a good load of, anaerobic infections, it is better to start with anaerobic cultures.
Great. Understood, ma'am. Clear. Clear. And thank you so much for answering all these questions, ma'am. Once again, thank you from our FCPI organization for giving this wonderful talk on this sampling process. It is our pleasure to have on the board, ma'am. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Dr. Satya. Thank you, FCPI, for giving me yet another opportunity. If any of y'all are in Mumbai, please do come and visit the lab. We'll always be happy to host you. Thank you so much.
Definitely, definitely. It's our
Bye-bye.
honor. Thank you so much, ma'am. Our pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.